Hi, everyone, and good morning. So Eric made it very clear there's a QR code, so I'm expecting a lot of questions because, you know, there's this untold rule that you want to have the more questions for the panels of the day. So please ask a lot of questions. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. We have 40 minutes to talk about the great realignment, crossroads of AI fragmentation, but of course, economic uncertainty. So AI, as we all know, #1 worry over the last 5 years because of that poll, certainly for people here in the room, and it's cutting costs of expertise and boosting productivity. It's also shaping up labor markets and raising the risk of market bubbles. The world seems to be splitting into rival blocks and fragile supply chains, making resilience and security the new drivers of investment opportunities. So let's get straight to it. José Muñoz, let's start with you. So how are you seeing this reordering of world power with the auto industry, where China has been on this incredible ascendance and the rest of the world is also struggling, frankly, to keep up with the ever-shifting whims of the White House?
Well, it's a huge challenge, right? But then part of the culture of our company is, since our founder, Jun Chang, is to really take every change as a great opportunity, right? And then indeed that's what we're trying to do. But it's changing completely the environment because particularly the tariffs, the change in regulation, the wars are making the big OEMs and us in particular to make really big changes. But one of the key conclusions for us was, okay, we are not looking at things in the short term, we're looking at things in the mid to long term. And then we still believe electrification is here to stay and is going to continue to grow, and therefore we are maintaining our investments, and we're doubling down in a market like the United States, where we have announced investments of $26 billion, and as soon as 2 days ago, announced also 125 trillion Korean won, is about $86 billion of investment the next 5 years in Korea as well, to be more localized, to be able to navigate in this difficult situation. So again, not short term, mid to long term is the solution, and I think the market is giving us some good hopes that this is the right way to go.
Jose, and I want to talk about supply chains in just a second, because that feels like a nightmare trying to reroute some of them. But Georges, you're head of HSBC. When you look at, you know, how difficult it is for such a global bank to adjust a global strategy exactly at a point where the world is increasingly divided by geopolitical blocks.
Thank you, Francine. The first thing is the world is reconfiguring, globalization is reconfiguring, and we're basically following that trend. We're supporting our customers follow that trend. What's important here is to realize that there's been major shifts. So 20 years ago, you could summarize global trade by saying China manufactures, the US consumer buys, and that's global trade. Subsequently, China's been manufacturing for the world. What we're seeing more recently is Asia buys Asia. We're seeing China manufacture in the world as opposed to for the world. This Asia buys Asia trend is supported a lot of intra-Asia, the wider Asia, Asia Middle East, supported a lot of trade within this region. It supported a lot of foreign direct investment in this region. It supported a lot of employment in this region. And the way we look at it is with more integration within this wider region, we will add 1.8% to GDP across the region. Now, the US tariffs will obviously hurt, but the estimate we have is that they will hurt around 0.5% GDP. So therefore, net-net, this region can benefit from greater integration within, you know, for trade and for FDI. And, you know, Francine, this is, these reconfigurations have been, you know, happening throughout our history. We've been born 160 years ago here in Asia. We've been 148 years in Singapore. So I want to say, how do we help our customers? Muscle memory.
Muscle memory is always a good idea. Chow Kiat, how do you see actually the economy changing? What's driving it? Is it geopolitics? Is it AI? Is it everything in between? Or is it actually just labor dynamics?
Right. Well, it's everything, right? I mean, to be sure, these changes, I would say, have been accumulating for at least the last 5 to 10 years. The way we looked at it is that we looked at changes sort of at 3 levels, right? The first is cyclical. Those are the stuff that we have been dealing with, right? Business cycles. The second is what we would call structural, things which you could kind of predict, for example, demographics. And then finally, in the last few years, what we are seeing is what we call foundational. right? I mean, the top three forces for foundational changes are AI, geopolitics, and climate change. So if you take those three, for example, and then you think about the implications, there are a couple. Fragmentation is one of them, and that has great implication in terms of how you should allocate capital. It also has implication in terms of the macro, right? Net, the cost of doing business is going higher, and the cost of defense and other things will probably cause a bit of inflation pressure. That's on the macro front. I think for businesses, there's also implication of incumbency versus startup, right? Especially with technology coming. So we are looking at that very, very closely as an investor, but also thinking about, how managers or operators can add value, right? So incumbency, take that as an example, has great advantages, especially in the AI age where you have data, you have customers already. Those are big advantages. Question is, can an incumbent adapt quickly, right? And that, could decide whether you end up a winner or losers. But generally, because the spend is so big, right, as this world goes through all this adjustment, we do see, kind of what people might call a K-shaped divergence. The big looks like will get bigger, right? The tech, will have an advantage over the non-tech. So I think that's another kind of trend that, as capital allocator, we want to sort of make sure that we put money on the right side.
That's, again, always a good idea to put money on the right side. Lei, how do you see this fragmentation? Do you have to choose between being either an ally of China or the US?
So the business we are in is renewable energy. We believe this is more foundational layer for different global localization. So, I always believe in the current geopolitical tension is coming from net zero, zero-sum game. But technology innovation is the way to improve productivity, to break through the zero-sum game, actually is to make the pie bigger rather than dividing pie. So that's why energy technology is most important. People start to realize now with AI development, the foundation is about energy. Again, so renewable energy even more fundamental because we are going to build a foundation on the unlimited, infinite renewable energy, which is supposed to be free. So, nowadays, the technology we are operating just make me kind of think about before industrialization. Every country, some countries have some coal, some countries have not. People are willing to buy steam engine, using steam engine to build their industrial foundation for developing textile and industry, whatever. So the renewable technology today, the wind turbine is like steam engine back 200 years ago. So every country has the wind, bring wind turbine, solar panel, energy storage. You create a modern energy system. Upon that, you can build your modern, localized manufacturing, supply chain. So that's what I see is there's still a common ground on the foundational level.
I mean, the difference, I guess, with the steam engine period is this overlay of geopolitics. Is it difficult to navigate?
I think, as I said, if you actually get away from zero-sum game, so if you always think the inclusive development, collaborations, there are still huge rooms to be collaborative.
Jose, give me a sense of what this tumult means actually for Hyundai and your supply chains. So how much have they changed? And how much does it change? The idea of a great realignment is that at some point you reach the end point where it's fixed. Is that how we should see it, or is it ever evolving?
It's ever evolving. So this is a fundamental shift, right? So we are an international Korean company, and then a lot of the production takes place in Korea. And then because we are vertically integrated, we own our own suppliers, like Mobis, Globis, and others. And then it means that if you want to succeed in the new environment, for example, you cannot afford paying 25% tariffs or 15% tariffs and being competitive in the market. So you need to completely change that. How do you do that? You need to change your supply chain. You need to invest in the local markets, but you need to improve fundamentally your operation. So, for example, you need to have better quality, and you have to have higher productivity and lower costs. How do you do that? We utilize AI. We utilize robotics, Boston Dynamics. So we bring the latest and greatest technology to our plants. I'm very proud to say that we are the only OEM producing here in Singapore the Ioniq 5 in the state-of-the-art factory. It's almost an autonomous factory. So people are talking about autonomous driving. We are doing already the autonomous factory. And then the only thing that is not autonomous is the management, right? So we need real executives to manage the situation, to make the most out of it. But fundamentally, manufacturing becomes way more important because you cannot just rely on the old way of producing vehicles, increasing your costs. You cannot just pass the cost into the customer because otherwise you lose your business. So it's a fundamental realignment that requires a lot of speed. We call this in our company pali-pali. So this is our strength. We change very fast, and we try to apply also good planning, which we call midi-midi. So pali-pali, midi-midi, success factors to change very fast on a very strong plan. And how do you do that? I said to my American colleagues, when you at the same time had to produce and sell cars. You go to the 405 in Los Angeles, everybody knows there are millions of cars passing there. They're always working, always transforming. So they can never shut down and say, hey, let's do this quickly. Now, we cannot do that either. So we need to maintain our investors happy. I think we're doing a decent job there, but it's a fundamental change. But again, looking in the mid to long term, it's all about investing, being more local. So you cannot anymore rely on, I'm a global company, I produce in Korea, I ship cars everywhere, and that's it. No. The solution for each market is a different one. And in our particular case, obviously, US very, very important. We cannot just simply abandon. But in a way, this could be an opportunity if, for example, some of the competitors cannot enter in that market. China, we see as an opportunity, right? So it's a large market that's growing. Things are changing also. We want to do better there. Europe, regulation is having a huge impact. But fundamentally, you know, things that we used to do once every 6 months, and then maybe once every 1 month during COVID, now is like every day. Hey, the regulation changed. What do you do? Okay, IRA is no longer there. What do you do? How about leasing? How about this? So it's a lot of very active, hands-on, proactive management to make the most out of this situation and take advantage. This is an opportunity for those who are better than others. Huh?
It also sounds exhausting as a leader. Is it different leadership qualities that you need in 2025 to deal with all the changes?
Definitely, yes. I think we need to have people who are very connected, who are all the time talking to the shareholders, to the investors, but also to the end customer, to your dealers, to the politicians. So we are spending more time talking to politicians than in my previous life, yes. Right? Because things change so dramatically, and if you are late, then you lose, right? So it changes dramatically. But then we need to be in good shape. We need to sleep fast, as I say, so there's not so much opportunity to sleep in a day, and then always keep changing, keep adapting. And this is what is making our group one of the best performing groups nowadays under the leadership of Yusen Chang.
Georges, I mean, do you hear the same? Are you like a banker to exhausted CEOs that are just trying to, survive a little sleep to try and keep up with the news flow?
Yeah, everything Jose said, music is basically the story of my life. So, it is absolutely true. I think what's important here is to see through certain of the short-term challenges. I mean, we have a resilient business. We've been growing in the number of areas. Even the areas most challenged, such as trade, has been growing quarter after quarter, steadily, robustly. We're here to support our customers. We're here to provide them working capital facilities where they need it, etc., and that's doing well. If I look at our share price, it's performed well. But if you look at the volatility of our share price, it's mostly been driven by speculation on what the taxation is going to be. So the underlying business and the resilience is here, but it's the short-term speculation, not even fact, speculation of what's the taxation on banks, specifically in the UK, that's driven most of the volatility in our shares. So you have to see through that. You can't let this wake you up at night. What should wake up, us up at night is what's the future going to hold? How are we able to transform with the technology disruption? Are we going to be on that journey, or are we going to be, if you want, left behind? And we can't afford the latter, right? So we need to be on that journey.
Do you see, Georges, a world where you could also have competing financial systems, actually, or splitting off in different networks? Is that a step too far?
So the short answer, Francine, is no. Now, there are some countries, some jurisdictions that have been excluded from the financial system for many for years, some for decades, and I can see a flag behind you. Those countries have been excluded for various geopolitical reasons, and they're not in the financial system. Everything else, we see it as a cohesive financial system. I want to give you some illustration, Francine. 60% of our largest customers, wholesale customers, in mainland China are US companies. And mind that these are not US companies who are looking to manufacture in China to sell back into the US. The vast majority of them are actually manufacturing in mainland China for the China domestic market or for the Asian market opportunities, right? Now, they are very successful. They're making very good revenues and very good profits from this business, and they're paying very large dividends back into the US for the US shareholders. So that is not going to go away. That is the reality of how this world is integrated and how the financial system is integrated. I can say exactly the same thing about India. Okay, I can say, Francine, you and I live in London, right? If you jump on an electric black cab, or you jump on an electric double-decker red bus, or if you're buying renewable energy in the UK, chances are you're buying Chinese. And that's the reality.
And that you're not expecting it to change?
I think the resilience of this underlying fabric is absolutely here to stay. What has changed is that there are certain assets which have now become or be deemed national security assets, such as code, Gen AI type code, such as chips, semiconductors, the most advanced ones of them, such as data and cloud. And those assets are going to fragment. Those assets are going to have national boundaries. Data has had national boundaries for some time. Data visas are required to move data around. Regulation has started to have lots of national boundaries. And there's going to be more highly strategic assets that will have national boundaries. And we, as the financial system, but also all our customers, will have to respect that and ensure that we're protecting the national considerations for these. But you step out of these assets, and there is a multitude, there is a huge ocean of opportunities where business is still conducted on a cross-border basis, and business will continue to be conducted on a cross-border basis, and we believe that's going to be the case.
Chow Kiat, where are we actually in this global realignment? Are we 60% there? Are we 70% there? Or is it ever evolving? And again, was it accelerated by the Trump administration, or was it a sea change?
Right. I guess under this theme of realignment, there are several threads, right? You have, I think what we have seen so far has been on the security side, on the trade side, on the supply chain side. I think finance, is the one that I'm worried about, right? Because I think for other parts, there are some very difficult issues. Let's say on trade. With the tariff and all this adjustment, it's not really the fundamental, right? Because the fundamental has to come down to investment savings imbalances across countries. It's a very difficult rewiring of that. Essentially, I think the Chinese need to increase their consumption. The Americans need to reduce the consumption. But that's a very difficult sort of balance to achieve. Trade, in a way, is a symptom of that, right? So that is happening, but maybe just, frankly, at the surface. Supply chain rewiring is very expensive, right? Because we already have had this kind of global arrangement for so many years. Many of the parts are already in place for decades. to try and shift that is going to be very costly and actually is very risky, right? Because a disruption in one part can send, shock wave into the whole chain. We have seen it, in fact, right? Quite a few examples. But I'm hoping that on the finance side, we don't get there. That there's enough wisdom that a big part of that global financial system, in a way, is global good, right? It's public good, right? So be very careful in rewiring that. I was just talking to an institution that is involved in that whole kind of plumbing system, and they are in a certain jurisdiction. And of course, because of that, they are subject to the law of the land. And if the country imposes, for example, sanction on another country, they have to comply, right? But actually, at that institution, if you look at their function, which is really global public good, I was joking with them that they should be subject to UN Security Council's jurisdiction. There's enough veto, right, to make sure that they are not having to act in a certain way. Because once you touch that financial plumbing, I think there will be a lot of unintended consequences, and the cost will be significantly higher than what we have seen on the trade side.
But do you worry, therefore, what do you worry exactly about? Is it like unpredictable inflation or,
well, just weaponization,
something systemic?
Right? Weaponization of financial institutions.
Of financial systems.
Right.
Do you see decoupling in the world, like real decoupling?
I think there are a lot of temptation to do that.
Yeah.
But so far, I'm quite encouraged that the people in charge, I think, have the wisdom to recognize that it might backfire.
Jose, can you update us on what happened at the Georgia battery plant in the U.S.? So there was a raid, and you said that will set you back 2-3 months.
Right. So that was a bad surprise. And then the number one surprise was that I received a phone call, and then what happened? And then it was not our plant, but it was portrayed as if it was our plant. It was an LG plant. And then we are shareholders, but it's a separate plant from the assembly plant. Well, I think there was a kind of independent activity from either the federal government and the state government. I got phone call from the White House apologizing for what happened. They were not aware, they didn't know, so why this is happening when the company, as part of the South Korea tariff negotiation, is really making big commitments to invest in the country. As I mentioned earlier, $26 billion in the next 4 years versus $20.5 billion in the last 40 years, which is the time we've operated in the U.S. That was a kind of a big surprise. The governor of Georgia, Governor Kemp, also called me and said, I don't know what happened. This is not a state jurisdiction. So apparently somebody made a phone call and made it look like there were illegal immigrants. That's absolutely not the case. And in fact, President Trump didn't want those workers to get back to Korea. The fact is, there are a number of jobs that require to be specialized, and in particular in the battery business, and a number of processes and technologies that are not available in a very well-developed country like the United States. And then you need to bring specialized people to do it. The system, the immigration system, does not recognize that. So I think if we want to be positive, I always try to apply the PMA attitude, positive mental attitude, right? So the good thing is that as a result, we've had a lot of discussions with the federal government, with the state, with the immigration authorities, both in Korea and in the United States. And now we're finding very good permanent solutions, not only for our suppliers like LG, but for our own people. We have thousands of people who come and help us to establish the operation, and then they go back to Korea. And I think for others as well. We're coordinating much better among all the companies that are impacted. And I think at the same time...
And it hasn't dented actually your commitment to the U.S. in the slightest?
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, we need to look at the things in the long term. This happened right 1 week before we were having the very first CEO Investor Day outside of Korea in the history of the company. And it was me, the first non-Korean CEO, making the presentation in New York. And they ask me, are you going to change your plans? Oh, no, we are not here for the short term. We've been in this country for many years. This is the number one market, is where we make the most. We cannot just simply, because something happened, which is obviously an accident, and then you get even apologies from the President of the United States just saying that this is going to change our plan. No, on the contrary, I said we double down. We want to maintain our investment in the country. We think that in the mid to long term, things are going to get better, but obviously we need to make also a lot of adjustments to the supply chain, to the products that we're going to produce. But ultimately, it's all about having good products in the market, being very competitive, high quality, top safety, durability, reliability, to be competitive in the marketplace. If you don't get back to your fundamentals and you change your strategy when you have an event, then things are going to change. So, for example, by the end of September, IRA finished. Right, and then the OEMs and the consumers were getting benefit of $7,500 if you bought an electric vehicle. Well, we see what happens in China, we see what happens in Europe, and even in the United States. In many states, you know, the EV is a better solution for the consumer. So we have maintained our plan. We not only maintain the Savannah plant investment, which is about $12.6 billion and more than 8,500 people, but we have announced an expansion. But then what we're doing with this expansion, instead of doing all electric vehicles, we're going to produce also hybrid, EREV, extended range EV, and fuel cell EV, etc. So flexibility, adaptability, being very fast to be able to capitalize on the new situation. So I remember we were announcing the new factory, the grand opening in March, the Liberation Day, when the President announced the tariffs.
Perfect timing.
Yeah, perfect timing. So they were asking me, wow, you're such a visionary, right? So you knew this was happening, and then you are localizing. Yes, exactly. So the things don't work this way, right? So you need to have a plan, stick to your plan, adapt it, be very fast, and always look at the different players to maintain a good performance to your shareholders and ultimately to delight your customers. We call it Sonnim, which is the honor guest concept in Korea.
So just a reminder, we have 10 minutes left, and I'm still waiting for questions. So feel free, otherwise I have a million more questions. Lei, when you look at what you were talking about, renewables, but also AI, I mean, in this new, ever-changing, ever-evolving world, who will be the winners and losers? And actually, how much disruption are you expecting in your own company in 5 years?
Right. So, Envision, we not consider ourselves an energy company. We also position ourselves as an AI company. We are applying, physical AI in particular, which is more than a large language model. We're going to put these physical laws in the AI models to harness the energy system. For instance, today we are making our green hydrogen as cost competitive as gray today already. Is 1.5 million ton green ammonia facility has been built up. So the first phase, 300,000 ton, but reached the cost parity. Why? How can we change to manage that? We put this wind solar storage in the Gobi Desert of Inner Mongolia. The only resources we are used is wind and sunshine and the wastewater from the city. There are three elements. Then we create green hydrogen and green ammonia. So how can we achieve that? AI is playing a very important role. Firstly, we're building AI climate foundation model, which makes us to look through the weather pattern, which is supposed to supercomputing to figure out what's happening. If beyond 7 days, no clue. But we are able to have improved 50% accuracy for weather forecasting. Then we are able to adjusting all the renewable production. Secondly, because the system is so complex, it's the largest independent renewable energy system in the world. So have so many devices, human coordination is almost impossible. We're using AI, of course, with a physical boundary to manage such an electrical and a chemical facility. So then we are able to use 100% renewable energy, which we are, because the green hydrogen costs 80% coming from electricity. We have such a low cost electricity, then we're making green hydrogen cost competitive. So we already feel this is the impact of AI, but we also using that project as a training base for energy foundation model, because it's an independent system end to end. It's so complicated. We are training our model every day. So then it's become much more efficient.
Thank you. So we only have a couple of minutes left. So I'll ask you, almost like quick fire, rapid questions. Chow Kiat, we have a question. Now the Q&A questions are coming in. I have many. How do you think about de-dollarization and implications for emerging alternatives to the dollar? Is it stablecoin? Is it digital baskets? And I guess this goes back to my underlying questions, which is winners and losers over the next decade.
Yeah, I mean, this question has been, talked about quite a lot, right? I guess different definition to this de-dollarization. One version is that will the U.S. lose its reserve currency status? That seems like a remote possibility, right? Unless, I guess, the foundation, right, of the U.S. system cracks. We don't really see that. Right? There are some challenges with regard to, debt and fiscal position. Growth is very important. It does seem like a lot of things are riding on AI, right, to get growth. There's a lot of reliance on AI delivering productivity. So if that doesn't happen, you might get a bit of a hairline crack, to some of this. But we don't see that. There aren't clear alternatives. I mean, I would say in the currency market, investors sort of adjusting their currency exposure is quite a normal thing, right? If you have, let's say, a very high exposure to a particular currency or country, adjusting it down 10% is not unusual. And the good thing is that financial market today allows for this kind of adjustment. So I would say that there are enough levers for investors and other participants to adjust the position without causing a big problem.
Georges?
Francine, I agree with Chow Kiat. Just to give you some numbers, 50% of global payments are done in dollars. 60% of global reserves are US dollar based. 80% of trade is financed in dollars, and more than 95% of foreign exchange is done against dollar. So that will erode, but that's not going to change the landscape. The dollar remains the major currency, right? That it will erode because there will be diversification, there will be usage of other currencies, there will be more and more usage of gold in reserve management, but it's not going to materially change the picture, certainly not in my career, probably not in my lifetime. This being said, payment trails, and this is kind of going back to what Lei was saying, payment trails will evolve. I mean, we are still on payment trails that have been invented many decades ago, and they're become much more efficient, of course, over the many decades. But the fact that we need a refresh, 24/7, instantaneous, frictionless payment capabilities, which could be provided, among other, by blockchain technology, is definitely a likely outcome of diversification of payment trails. And it's very important that we work on them, we test them, we make them more and more resilient, we make them bank grade standard, financial services grade standard. But that evolution is much more real than if you want a de-dollarization.
Jose, when you look at winners and losers, I know that you have a very clear advantage, certainly because of when you look at Elon Musk's focus on robots and humanoid robots. You're like decades ahead. But given the fast pace of advance, be it driverless cars, of robotics, I mean, is that enough? A couple of decades? Advancing?
Is never enough. And in fact, whilst our company is, I would argue, one of the most advanced, I think we're a technology company who happens to be in the automotive business, right? Because we produce chips, we have robots with Boston Dynamics, we do logistics with Globis, we have our own bank and the capital, our autonomous driving company, Motional, for example. But that's never enough. So as an example, we thought that strategically it would be good for us to have a strong partnership with the best domestic company, for example, in the US. So we made a partnership with General Motors, right, to co-produce, to co-develop, and to achieve synergies in terms of localization. When Hyundai plus Kia plus Genesis are the third largest OEM in volume, the second in profits, but we still think we could have more synergies. So we partnered with the GM, we made a partnership with Waymo, for example, for robotaxis, or with Amazon for online sales, and many others, right? So we think that AI, robotics, autonomous driving, all this is here today. We have the technology today, and it's more a matter of regulation. So therefore, we need to look for the next frontiers and continue to adapt. Again, the fundamentals is the most important. How do you take advantage of this? And then to your earlier point, CK, so I think very, very important to avoid having a transformation where you lose business is how you transform when you grow. So we presented a plan to grow 35% volume by 2030, 55% on Genesis, which is double-digit profit. So you have to think forward, breakthrough, to be able to navigate winning instead of thinking you're going to lose. So you either grow or go. So you have to be careful.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for a spirited conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.